"There's only enough for family," my stepdad said, pushing the bread basket away while my stepsiblings devoured lobster and filet mignon. My mom looked away and murmured, "Don't make this about you." I stayed silent, then walked over to the manager, closed the tab I opened, and said loud enough for the table to hear, "Please escort table 7 out. They're no longer my guests." There are moments in life that shatter your naive beliefs, and mine came not with a bang, but with the quiet scrape of a bread basket and a whispered betrayal that cut deeper than any knife. I'm talking about a feeling so sharp, so utterly demeaning, it felt like my entire world just snapped into cold, hard focus. I can still hear it, that awful sound. Ceramic against wood, wicker against linen, followed by the precise click of my stepdad's Rolex as he slid a basket of rosemary focaccia, fragrant with melting butter, away from me. Away from me, like I was some stray dog begging for scraps. I was 19, dressed in a button-down shirt I'd ironed myself, trying desperately to look presentable for a family dinner where I was realizing I didn't matter at all. My name's Luke, I'm 23 now, but this happened 4 years ago. Back then, I held on to this incredibly foolish belief that family dynamics could be repaired. That if you just showed up, stayed polite, bit your tongue, maybe, just maybe, love could win out over old resentments. That's the story I told myself when my mom invited me to her big family dinner, celebrating my stepdad Rick's promotion. "He's trying to be better," she'd said on the phone, trying to sell me on a fresh start. "The kids are excited to see you. Come on, Luke. It'll mean a lot." The truth is, I hadn't been around much since I got my scholarship and dipped the second I could. Not because I hated anyone, but because in that house, the walls always felt like they were pressing in on me, like I was a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. Rick, my stepdad, had 2 kids from a previous marriage, Blake and Madison. They were a couple of years younger than me. Picture the golden retriever son and the Instagram princess archetypes, and you've got them. Perfect smiles, expensive hobbies, endless praise from adults who never asked them to lift a finger. Me? I was Debbie's mistake. That's how Rick once referred to me when he thought I was out of earshot. I was 14. Mom had just married him a year before. I'd just finished doing the dishes after everyone else had gone into the living room. Rick was in the kitchen, pouring himself a scotch, when his buddy on speaker asked how he liked being a family man again. Rick laughed, this deep, sharp, bark-like laugh, and said, "Well, there's only so much you can do when you marry someone with baggage." I didn't cry. I didn't even tell my mom. I just started cleaning more quietly after that. Fast forward to that dinner. I remember standing outside the restaurant, a high-end steakhouse I definitely couldn't afford on my own, rehearsing my small talk. My mom was already inside. Rick had rented out a private room. When the hostess led me in, everyone was already seated. Blake and Madison waved like I was some vague acquaintance. Rick gave me a stiff nod. My mom looked tired. Not in the long day at work kind of way, more like she was bracing herself for impact. I slid into the empty chair at the end of the table. That's when I noticed it. No place setting for me. No big deal, I thought. Maybe they just forgot. I flagged down the waiter with a polite smile and asked for a menu. He glanced at Rick, who gave the tiniest shake of his head. The waiter came back. "Oh, we're actually doing a preset dinner for the table tonight," he said, "but I'll bring you a menu just in case." I opened it. The cheapest entree was $42, and that was the vegetarian option. Everyone else already had their starters. Madison had some seared tuna. Blake was halfway through his French onion soup, slurping obnoxiously while making a show of swirling his wine. Yes, wine. He was 17, but Rick had connections. Apparently, that included the ability to ignore drinking laws. I folded the menu shut, and I waited, and waited, and waited. 20 minutes in, the server brought out the next course. Lobster tails for Blake and Madison. Filet mignon for Rick and my mom. Still nothing for me. I cleared my throat gently. Rick looked over, a fake, innocent expression on his face. "Oh, did you want something, Luke?" Yeah, I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I thought we were all eating." He raised an eyebrow and gestured toward the untouched bread basket at the center of the table. "There's only enough for family," he said. Then, slowly, deliberately, he slid the bread basket away from me and placed it between Blake and Madison. My mom didn't say anything. She just stared down at her plate. I caught her eyes for a second. She whispered, barely audible, "Don't make this about you." That line. That was the crack. Not a break, not an explosion, just a crack in the dam. But it ran deep. I didn't say anything. Not right away. I just leaned back in my chair and nodded slowly. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face neutral. It's funny how sometimes pain doesn't register as pain. It registers as this weird, cold clarity, like your body stepping out of itself. Rick chuckled under his breath and turned back to his steak. "Kids these days," he said to no one in particular, "think they're entitled to everything." I watched them laugh, eat, toast, like I was invisible, like I wasn't even there. What they didn't know, what none of them realized, was that when I walked in earlier, I had opened a tab. The hostess had asked whose name to put it under, and I told her almost as a reflex, "Luke, I'll cover my end." And right then, sitting at that table, watching my mom avoid my gaze while my step-siblings giggled over something on Madison's phone, something clicked. A part of me that had been quiet for years finally stood up. I stood too, pulled out my wallet, and walked straight to the front of the restaurant. The hostess blinked when she saw me. "I'd like to cancel the tab I opened," I said, keeping my voice calm. She frowned. "Is everything all right?" I smiled. "Oh, it's fine now. But could you do me a favor?" I pointed to the private room, table 7. "Please let them know they've been removed from my guest list. And if they ask why, just say the host changed his mind." She looked startled. I could see the manager heading over, probably catching on for my tone. I didn't raise my voice, but I spoke loud enough for table 7 to hear. "Please escort table 7 out. They're no longer my guests." Then I turned around slowly and made eye contact with Rick. That was the moment everything changed. But that's not where it began. Because that dinner, that was just the spark. You want to know what led up to that moment? The years of subtle jabs, the double standards, the careful erasure of anything that made me feel like a son? Buckle up. You're going to see how a lifetime of disrespect builds up like gasoline on dry grass. And how sometimes all it takes is one flicker, one petty, perfect moment to light it all up. Let's go back, not to the dinner, but to when it all really started unraveling. Not that I saw it at the time. See, when you grow up walking on eggshells, you don't realize you're bleeding until someone else walks barefoot beside you and says, "Hey, this isn't normal." After the dinner incident, I didn't go no contact immediately. I didn't storm out and burn bridges. I wish I could say I was that brave back then, but I wasn't. What I did was what I always did. I went quiet. I went still. I waited for someone, anyone, to reach out and make things right. No one did. Not my mom. Not Rick. Certainly not Blake or Madison. A week went by before I got a text from my mom. Not a phone call. Just a text. "You embarrassed me. Please don't do that again." That was it. "No. How are you?" "No. I'm sorry you felt hurt." Just a plea not to rock the boat. A boat that had already been sailing without me for years. Let's rewind a little further to my final year of high school. That's where most of the tension really started showing its face, like mold creeping through the walls. I had just turned 17 and was working part-time at a local bookstore. Nothing glamorous, but it helped me buy my own clothes, pitch in for gas, and most importantly, avoid being home more than I needed to. Rick never said it outright, but there was this unspoken rule in the house. If you weren't Blake or Madison, you needed to be useful. I remember one particular afternoon. It was summer, and the house felt like it was holding its breath from the heat. Rick came into my room without knocking, looked around like he was evaluating the square footage, and said, "You're mowing the lawn today." I looked up from my desk. "I have a shift at 4 o'clock, I said. "Then mow it before that," he said, already turning to leave. "No excuses." "But Blake's home," I pointed out, careful with my tone. "Can't we alternate?" Rick stopped in the doorway. "Blake's got football conditioning. He needs his energy. He was literally watching YouTube in his room. I pointed it out, instantly regretting it. Rick stepped back in. His voice dropped. Don't talk back. You want to live in this house? You pitch in. You're not Blake. He didn't have to say more. He never did. So I mowed the lawn. Then I took a shower, burned my hand on the hot water Blake always hogged, and biked to work in a wrinkled uniform. Came home to find out Madison had friends over and Rick had ordered them pizza. There were 6 boxes. Not a single slice left for me. Just an empty fridge, an ignored text to my mom, and a passive-aggressive note on the counter. Next time, get home earlier if you want to eat. That was the rhythm of my teen years. Serve. Be useful. Be quiet. Be less. One Christmas stands out more than the rest. We were all gathered in the living room. Fireplace crackling. Mariah Carey blaring. Madison was opening her 3rd gift, a brand new iPhone, latest model. Blake had just unwrapped a signed jersey and tickets to a playoff game. My mom kept cooing over them like they were toddlers. Rick handed them each envelopes stuffed with cash. Even the dog got a new bed. I waited patiently, watching the pile under the tree dwindle. Then my mom turned to me with a hesitant smile. Oh, Luke, there's one more. She handed me a soft package. I opened it. It was a sweater. Not a designer one. Not even a nice one. Just a clearance rack sweater. Wrong size. Still had the price tag on, $15. Thanks, I said, trying to sound grateful, my throat tight. Rick didn't even look at me. You're a grown man now, he muttered, sipping his eggnog. Don't expect handouts forever. Blake laughed and tossed a balled-up wrapper at my head. That night, while they all watched a movie, I locked myself in my room and stared at the sweater for a long time. I remember wondering if I was crazy for being upset. Asterisk, it's a sweater, right? Not a big deal. Asterisk, but it wasn't about the gift. It was the message. The hierarchy. The invisible wall they built and draped in polite conversation and holiday music. My mom came in later and sat on the edge of my bed. You okay? She asked, avoiding my eyes. Yeah, I lied. Just tired. She nodded slowly. You know Rick means well. He's just set in his ways. I stayed silent. You're strong, Luke. You've always been independent. That's the line she always fed me when I got the short end of the stick. You're strong. As if that made it okay. As if being strong meant you didn't deserve affection. College was my ticket out. I got a scholarship for a state university a few hours away. It wasn't an Ivy League, but it was mine. I packed up everything I owned into a beat-up Honda Civic I bought with bookstore money, and I left without any fanfare. Rick didn't help me move. My mom gave me a tepid hug. Blake and Madison didn't even say goodbye. The first semester was like breathing clean air for the first time. I made friends. I joined a film club. I started writing short stories. For once, I felt like I was more than a footnote in someone else's narrative. I'd call my mom every now and then. She'd update me on the family, like I was an old coworker. Blake got MVP again. Madison's looking at colleges in California. Rick might get promoted this year. She never asked about my classes or my writing or the short film I directed that actually won 2nd place in a local competition. I told her about it once and she said, "That's cute. I bet Rick could give you some business tips to really turn that into something." Rick sold insurance. I was making art. But okay. The few times I came home for breaks, it was like stepping into a time capsule. Same hierarchy. Same passive digs. Same hollow smiles. One Thanksgiving, Blake made a joke about how I probably write poetry in a tree somewhere, and Rick laughed so hard he spilled gravy on his shirt. My mom just rolled her eyes. Madison made a snide comment about film majors being unemployed. I hadn't even told her my major. She must have stalked my Instagram. When I said I was thinking about starting a YouTube channel to post my short films, Rick scoffed. Or you could get a real job. I left early the next morning. So, when my mom called about the family dinner, we want to celebrate Rick's promotion together. I should have known better. But a part of me still hoped, still wanted to believe that maybe just once I could sit at the table and not feel like a ghost. Instead, Rick pulled the bread basket away like I was some panhandler. My mom whispered, "Don't make this about you." And the last sliver of hope in me withered. What I didn't tell you earlier is what happened right after I canceled the tab and walked out of that restaurant. I didn't go home. I didn't cry in the car. I drove to a gas station, bought a Red Bull and a pack of gum, and just sat in the parking lot, windows down, breathing. I looked at my phone. No messages. No missed calls. They didn't follow me. They didn't care. That's when something shifted. I realized I didn't just want distance from them. I wanted justice. Not the loud, messy, shouting match kind. Not the social media rants or the screaming in parking lots. No, I wanted the kind of justice that leaves people stunned, that forces them to sit with what they've done, that turns the mirror on them and makes them finally see.
It would take time.
It would take patience. And it would start with something small, something they never saw coming. I didn't know it then, sitting in that parked car with my hands clenched around a melting energy drink. But I had already started planning it. Not revenge, exactly, not yet. But the setup, the slow, deliberate unraveling of the narrative they built around themselves. And believe me, it was going to hurt. The thing about betrayal is that it rarely comes all at once. It's not a tidal wave. It's a slow leak. Drip by drip, your trust drains out of the bottom until one day you look down and realize the floor's rotted through. After the dinner, I went dark. No calls, no texts. I muted my mom's number and turned off notifications for the family group chat. Not that anyone ever used it unless they needed something. It wasn't a formal no-contact situation. I just needed space, air, room to finally hear my own thoughts without their voices echoing in my head. The months that followed were some of the most productive I'd ever had. I poured myself into school, got a part-time gig doing freelance video editing, picked up a few clients, and started producing real work I could be proud of. One of my short films even got selected for a regional student festival. Small, sure, but it felt like my life was finally becoming mine. No breadcrumbs, no backhanded compliments, just my own damn table. But I should have known peace was temporary with them. It was mid-April when the first message slipped through. I was in the campus library, editing a scene, when my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in months. Mom. "Hey, can we talk?" "It's important." Just 6 words. That was all it took to make my stomach twist. I didn't reply right away. I sat there, staring at the screen, trying to decide if important meant someone was dying, or if it just meant Rick wanted to force another awkward dinner. 15 minutes passed before she texted again. "It's about your grandfather." That made me pause. Grandpa Henry, my mom's dad, was one of the few relatives who ever treated me like an actual person. A retired mechanic with thick hands and a soft voice. He used to sneak me $20 bills when Rick wasn't looking and say, "Don't let him tell you who you are, kid." He wasn't rich, but he had a house in rural Pennsylvania, a vintage Harley in the garage, and a library of old records that smelled like cedar and vinyl. We used to sit on his porch during summers while he told me stories about how he built his first car from scraps in the 60s. He was my escape hatch from everything Rick represented. So I called. "Luke," my mom answered, voice flat. "Your grandfather had a stroke." The world tilted a little. "Is he okay?" I asked, sitting up. "He's stable," she said quickly, as if rehearsed. "But he's in rehab. It's going to be a long recovery." I ran my hand down my face. "Why didn't anyone tell me sooner?" "Well," she hesitated. "We weren't sure how to reach you. You've been distant." I clenched my jaw. "I live in the same place. My number hasn't changed." She ignored that. "We're handling everything for now, but I thought you should know. I wanted to see him. I said I'd drive up that weekend." She paused before saying, "That's not really necessary. He's still disoriented. Doesn't recognize many people." Didn't recognize people? That didn't sound like the grandfather I knew. But maybe she was right. Maybe it wasn't the right time. I asked her to keep me updated. She said she would. We hung up, but something didn't sit right. So a week later, I drove up anyway. It took me 6 hours. I called the rehab center ahead of time, explained who I was, and asked if I could visit. They were hesitant at first, but agreed after I confirmed I was listed as a family contact on his file. That's when the first red flag waved. He doesn't get many visitors, the nurse said. I blinked. My mom hasn't come? She was here once. The day he arrived. Once in 2 weeks, I walked into his room expecting the worst. Tubes, machines, vacant eyes. But there he was, frail, yes, thinner, but alert, awake. And when he saw me, he smiled. Looky, he rasped, voice weak, but familiar. There's my boy. I sat by his bedside and took his hand. We talked for an hour. He asked about school, about my videos, about whether I'd finally found someone who doesn't talk down to me. He was lucid, sharp. The stroke had slowed his speech, but not his mind. Where's your mom? He asked. I hesitated. She said you wouldn't recognize me. His brow furrowed. Why would she say that? I didn't have an answer.
And he didn't need one.
We just sat there in silence for a moment, the kind that says more than any words can. Then he dropped the bomb. They're trying to sell my house. My blood ran cold.
What?
He nodded slowly. Said it's too much upkeep. Said they'd move me into assisted living and use the money for expenses. I told them no, but then they stopped visiting. Figured I wasn't cooperating. I stared at him, trying to process it. Did you sign anything? Not yet, he said, but they keep sending papers. I swallowed hard. Can I see them? He motioned toward the drawer by his bed. I opened it and pulled out a folder filled with documents. Power of attorney requests, medical proxies, property transfer forms, all with my mom's name and Rick's typed neatly at the bottom. Unfiled. And unsigned. I wanted to scream. Instead, I photographed every page. Every single one. I don't want them touching my house, he whispered. I built it. It's mine. I won't let them, I said quietly. I promise. When I left that day, I didn't just drive home. I went straight to the county clerk's office. Turns out they'd already filed for temporary guardianship. My mom and Rick, claiming that Grandpa was mentally unfit to make decisions regarding his estate. The court date was scheduled for the following Monday. No one told me. They didn't expect me to know. They figured I'd stay silent like I always had. But not this time. That weekend, I gathered everything. Medical records from the rehab center. Signed letters from Grandpa's doctor confirming he was competent. Video clips I'd recorded with Grandpa's permission. I even brought a short letter Grandpa had written me back in high school, still in my dorm drawer, just to prove our bond. I showed up to the court date unannounced. My mom looked like she'd seen a ghost when I walked through the doors. Rick's smug expression faltered for the first time I'd ever seen. Madison and Blake weren't there. Too busy living their golden child lives, I guess. I won't get into all the legal details. But I will say this. The judge was not impressed with what they tried to pull, especially after I laid out every piece of evidence showing Grandpa's clarity of mind. And after I read aloud one of the lines from their petition that said Grandpa had no meaningful connection to any other family, the judge paused, looked at them, then looked at me. You're his grandson? She asked. Yes, Your Honor. Have you been in contact with him? I visited him last week. We talked.
He remembers me.
I can prove it. I played a 20-second clip on my phone. Grandpa smiling, calling me my boy, laughing at one of my dumb jokes. The room went silent. Temporary guardianship denied. My mom didn't even look at me as she left the courtroom. Rick brushed past me like I was air. But I didn't care. Because Grandpa was safe. His house was safe. His voice was heard. Still, something inside me shattered that day. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. They tried to erase him, his choices, his dignity. And they tried to erase me by cutting me out of the loop, by assuming I'd never show, never fight, never matter. They were wrong. That day, I realized something brutal and liberating all at once. This wasn't a family. It was a machine. And I'd been a cog in it for too long. So I started planning. Not just to protect Grandpa, that part was done. But to show them, once and for all, that you can't keep stepping on someone without eventually triggering a landmine. The best part? They had no idea what was coming next. After the court date, I didn't feel victorious. I thought I would. I thought proving them wrong in front of a judge, defending my grandfather, protecting his house, would finally be the moment I rose above everything. But instead, I walked out of that courtroom and felt hollow. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It wasn't even the climax. It was just another turn in the maze. Another layer of rot peeled back to reveal more underneath. I went back to campus, kept my head down, finished the semester. I didn't hear from my mom. Not even a one-line text to say, "You didn't have to do that." No passive-aggressive emoji. Nothing. A month later, I got a letter from her. Not a text, not a call. A letter, 3 pages long, sloppy handwriting. I kept it in a drawer for weeks before finally opening it. The first line read, "Luke, I don't know who you are anymore." Not, "How are you?" Not, "Why did you do it?" Just immediate guilt. She went on about how I embarrassed her, how I put on a performance at court, how Rick's career could have been affected if certain people had been there to witness it. She talked about her stress, her sacrifices, her embarrassment. She said Grandpa was confused, that I exploited him in a moment of weakness, that he was easily manipulated and would say anything to feel loved. She ended the letter with, "This family has tried with you. You need to ask yourself why you're always the problem." That sentence hit me harder than anything Rick ever said. Because it wasn't just cruel, it was a rewrite of reality. An erasure. Like my pain was just a phase. Like the problem wasn't what they did. It was that I refused to forget it. I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was nothing to say to someone who believed that my love for my grandfather was an act of manipulation. That summer was quiet. I stayed in town instead of going home. Picked up more editing work, worked late nights, ate a lot of microwave ramen and granola bars. I'd call Grandpa twice a week. We'd talk about everything except them. Then, sometime in July, I got a call from my old high school guidance counselor of all people, Mrs. Romero. I hadn't spoken to her since graduation. She'd always been kind to me. One of the only adults who noticed when I was walking through school like a ghost. "Luke," she said after the usual pleasantries. "I hope this isn't intrusive, but I got a strange call from your mother last week." My heart skipped.
About what?
"She said you were in crisis. That you'd been making unsettling videos and isolating yourself. She asked me to recommend a therapist who could perform an evaluation for a possible conservatorship." I went silent. "She mentioned your grandfather's situation," Mrs. Romero added carefully. "But it didn't make sense. I've seen your work online, Luke. You're not unstable. You're thriving." I swallowed hard. "She asked me not to tell you," she said. "But I thought you should know." That was the lowest moment. Not the courtroom. Not the Christmas sweater. Not even the bread basket. This quiet, secret campaign to make me seem unwell. This narrative that I was mentally unstable, just like they tried to paint Grandpa, because I refused to roll over and play dead. They weren't just cutting me out. They were discrediting me, undermining my reputation, whispering lies behind closed doors, building a safety net in case I ever spoke up again. If I ever went public, if I ever did something that made them look bad, they were preparing a fallback. Asterisk, Luke's not well. You can't trust him. Asterisk, I wish I could say I screamed, raged, tore my room apart. But I didn't. I just sat there.
Still.
Quiet.
Numb.
And that's when the planning really started. Because when you hit rock bottom, you get to decide what to do with the rubble. I started pulling every string I had. I talked to Grandpa's lawyer, found out my mom had quietly tried to list his house with a realtor weeks before the court hearing. The paperwork was halted because of my intervention, but the intent was there. The fraud was there. I started building a timeline. I gathered text messages, emails, documents, printed out screenshots, created a private cloud folder labeled Sundown. Not for revenge. Not yet. Just to preserve. To prove that I wasn't crazy, that there was a pattern, a strategy, a motive. I also started digging into Rick's finances. Nothing invasive, just public records. Turns out he had some skeletons. A tax lien from 2012, a bankruptcy from his first marriage, a history of employment gaps hidden behind corporate-sounding LLCs. But the real goldmine came when I found out he had been using Grandpa's house address on certain paperwork. Insurance, credit checks, a few minor filings, enough to raise questions, enough to imply residency, which was strange because Rick had never spent a single night under that roof. Grandpa hadn't even known. It wasn't just unethical. It was criminal. Still, I didn't act. Not yet. I wanted to be thorough. I wanted to be careful. I knew how easy it would be for them to twist things, to spin the narrative. Asterisk poor Rick and Debbie. Just trying to care for their struggling relative and their troubled son. Asterisk, I wasn't going to give them that. So, I did what I'd always done best. I stayed quiet, played the background, pretended to move on. When the fall semester started, I returned to school like normal, smiled at my professors, edited videos, attended screenings, even dated someone casually for a few months. But behind the scenes, I was watching, and what I saw made everything worse. Rick had gotten a new job, a higher title, more visibility. He'd become the face of a community leadership initiative, giving talks at local events, mentoring kids, donating to veterans charities. The public loved him. And my mom, she was the image of the doting wife. Hair always done, smile always ready, talking about how they gave up so much for their children, always paying it forward. There were articles, videos, social media posts, a whole online footprint curated to show them as heroes. And every single one of those smiling photos made me sick because I knew what happened behind the scenes. I lived it. They weren't heroes. They were architects of a lie. And eventually, inevitably, lies collapse. Especially when you start pulling at the corners. So that's what I did. Not all at once, slowly, quietly, strategically. And when I finally lit the match, I made sure the whole structure would burn. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because before the fire, before the explosion, before the public fallout, there was one more betrayal, one more knife in the back. The kind that makes you question whether love was ever real at all. And it came from the person I least expected. But I'll get to that soon because that's when things stopped being just personal and became war. It's strange how power doesn't arrive with a trumpet or a spotlight. It creeps in like morning light. Subtle, quiet, almost unnoticeable until you look around and realize the room is no longer dark. After rock bottom, I didn't rise with a roar. I rose with intention, slowly, methodically, like someone rebuilding a house with better materials, taking extra care to reinforce every corner that had once caved under pressure. This wasn't about revenge, at least not yet. It was about reclaiming control. And so I started with the one thing I always had, my work. School became my sanctuary. I dove headfirst into editing gigs, student film festivals, short documentaries, anything that gave me the chance to tell stories my way. I learned to be sharper, cleaner, more professional. I didn't just want to be good. I wanted to be undeniable. Because if there's one thing Rick and my mom always relied on, it was the idea that I needed them. That I'd always be one bad month away from crawling back. They were wrong. By spring, I was producing a mini-series for a local nonprofit about underrepresented youth in media. One of my projects got picked up by a regional news site. Then a niche streaming platform reached out to license a few episodes for their Emerging Voices section. It wasn't Hollywood money, but it was real, and it meant I could finally stop living paycheck to paycheck. I upgraded from microwave ramen to actual groceries. Bought a used Sony A73 off eBay. Learned to cook meals that didn't involve boiling water. Got a part-time internship at a studio that did post-production work for independent films. Started saving. Investing. Building. Meanwhile, Grandpa was thriving, too. We moved him out of the rehab facility and into a cozy assisted living apartment with on-site medical staff and a small garage for his old Harley. I visited him every other week, brought takeout, and showed him my latest projects. We'd eat on his little balcony and talk about life, his stories, my dreams, the irony of growing up in a family that didn't see us until we stopped playing their game. "They only notice you," he said one afternoon, "when you stop asking for scraps." That line stuck with me because he was right. I hadn't heard a peep from my mom or Rick since the court date. Madison occasionally posted pictures of luxury vacations on Instagram, ski trips, rooftop brunches, some wellness retreat in Arizona. Blake got a tattoo of a lion and started calling himself a sales entrepreneur. Neither of them mentioned Grandpa, not once. I wasn't just forgotten. I was written out. And honestly, that used to hurt. But now it gave me leverage. Because while they curated their perfect lives online, I was building receipts, quietly collecting everything they'd said, everything they'd signed, every contradiction between the image they sold and the truth they buried. And then the timing snapped into place. It started with a podcast. One of my professors knew a journalist from a popular investigative podcast. Think serial level popularity, but focused on ethical scandals involving public figures. She was looking to do a limited series on families who weaponized legal systems to control inheritance, power of attorney, and property ownership. My professor thought of me. I wasn't sure at first. I didn't want to air dirty laundry. I wasn't in it for the drama. But then I remembered Rick standing in that courtroom, smirking while my mother averted her eyes. I remembered that letter telling me I was always the problem. I remembered Christmas, the breadbasket, the lawnmower. I emailed the journalist. We talked. I showed her the court filings, the guardianship petition, the house paperwork, the financial documents Rick had submitted using Grandpa's address. I played the audio clip of my mom telling me, "Don't make this about you." I even included copies of the realtor agreements they tried to sneak past Grandpa. She didn't just listen. She was horrified. 2 weeks later, I got a message. "We're greenlighting your episode. You'll be featured in episode 3. We'll protect your name if you prefer." I said, "No, I want my name on it. Not for fame. For the record." The episode dropped 6 weeks later, and everything changed. It started with a ripple, a few retweets, some sympathetic DMs, comments calling out the manipulation, the gaslighting, the betrayal. But then the ripple turned into a wave. Because someone, probably a coworker, recognized Rick's voice in one of the hidden recordings. You could clearly hear him on the podcast saying, "There's no way he'll fight this.
He's weak."
He's always been weak. Talking about Grandpa, dismissing him like he was a burden to be moved around like furniture. That clip went viral. The internet didn't hold back. Asterisk manipulative snake stealing from an old man. Really? This guy has a job mentoring kids. Asterisk Rick's entire pillar of the community act started to crumble overnight. Local news picked up the story. His company suspended him, pending an internal investigation. One of the veterans groups he worked with publicly distanced themselves. A community board he chaired asked him to resign. I didn't even have to lift a finger. It was beautiful. My mom, to her credit, didn't make a statement, but she changed her Facebook profile picture to a black square for a week. Subtle, like a silent protest or a tantrum. Madison tried to post a story defending them. Said, "It's easy to twist words when you're bitter," and called the podcast fake news. It backfired instantly. Her comments lit up with screenshots, court records, and quotes from the episode. She deleted it an hour later. Blake stayed quiet. I think for the first time in his life, he realized there wasn't a joke to make. And me? I didn't say a word publicly, not on Twitter, not on Instagram, not even on Reddit. I let the truth speak for itself. Instead, I doubled down on my work. The exposure from the podcast landed me new clients. A filmmaker from LA reached out for editing help on a documentary. I got flown out for a weekend shoot. Got paid more than I'd made in an entire semester. People were asking for me, for my voice, my eye, my story. I upgraded my gear, got a better apartment, started writing a script based loosely on everything that happened. Not a documentary, a story, fictionalized, poetic, but real in the ways that matter. And through it all, I stayed close to Grandpa. He started calling me his partner in crime. We'd laugh about that night at the restaurant sometimes. How Rick's face looked when I said, "They're no longer my guests." Grandpa said it was the first time in years he felt like someone had stood up for him. "You didn't just save my house," he told me. "You saved me." I'm not going to lie, that broke me a little. Because after everything, after all the manipulation and silence and betrayal, that moment reminded me why I did any of it in the first place. Not for payback, but for love. Still, part of me couldn't rest. Not yet. Because there was one more thing I needed to do.
Not for Grandpa.
Not even for me, but for the kid I used to be. The one who stood in the kitchen scrubbing plates while Rick called him baggage. The one who watched his step-siblings get steak and lobster while he was told to be grateful for bread. That kid deserved closure.
And it was time to give it to him.
So I planned one final move. Careful.
Calculated.
Poetic. You'll see. Some revenge stories start with a bang. Mine started with a wedding invitation. It came in a heavy, cream envelope, gold-trimmed with cursive lettering that practically screamed, "Look at how successful we are." Madison was getting married, apparently, to some finance guy named Grant, the kind of guy who says things like crushing Q3 and calls vacations recharging retreats. The invitation didn't come directly from her, of course. It came from my mom. No note, no phone call, just the invite like a corporate memo. As if everything that had happened, Grandpa's house, the court case, the podcast, had just been a scheduling conflict we could now move past. It was being held at this luxury winery about an hour from the city. Black tie only, adults only, no plus ones unless approved by the bride. I stared at the RSVP card for a long time. Then I tucked it into a drawer and forgot about it until Grandpa brought it up. "Madison's wedding, huh?" he said over lunch one Sunday, raising an eyebrow. I nodded. "Got the invite. You going?" "I don't know." He took a sip of lemonade. "Because if you are, I think I've got something you'll want to bring." That's when he pulled out a flash drive. "What's this?" "Security footage," he said casually. "From the garage. From last year. Remember when Rick said he dropped by to check on the water heater?" I thought that was odd. So I installed the camera. Forgot all about it. I plugged the drive into my laptop later that night. What I saw made my jaw clench. There was Rick in broad daylight, walking into Grandpa's garage with a clipboard and a realtor, pointing around, smiling, opening cabinets, talking like he owned the place. And then, clear as day, Rick saying, "We'll need to list it under my LLC for now. The paperwork's just a formality." It wasn't just shady. It was criminal. Attempted fraud, misrepresentation, unauthorized access. Enough to open an investigation, and enough to permanently sever whatever fragile social image Rick had left. But I didn't go to the police.
Not yet.
I had a better idea because the wedding, that was my stage, and I'd been preparing for this performance my whole life. The day of the wedding arrived, warm and cloudless. Everyone at that winery was dressed like they were starring in a Vogue spread. Lace gowns, designer tuxes, the kind of place where the valet judges you by the year of your car. I wore a tailored navy suit. Nothing flashy, but sharp enough to stand out without making noise. I brought a +1. My friend Jess, a fellow filmmaker with a sharp tongue and a sharper camera. She wasn't approved by the bride. We walked right in anyway. No one stopped us. The ceremony was all roses and violin quartets. Madison looked stunning. I'll admit that. Rick walked her down the aisle with the air of a man who thought he deserved applause. My mom cried gently, dabbing her mascara like she was in a Hallmark movie.
And me?
I waited. Waited through the vows, the kiss, the champagne toast, the first dance. Then came the reception. Tables lined with candles and gold-accented name cards. Assigned seating, of course. I was at table 12, far corner. No microphone access, practically in the parking lot. Classic. But Jess wandered, mingled, filming a behind-the-scenes wedding reel. She told anyone who asked. They all assumed she was hired by the couple. No one questioned the camera. At 8:45 p.m., just before the speeches, I made my move. I walked to the DJ booth, slipped the DJ a flash drive. "It's a short tribute video for the bride," I said with a smile. Rick said to cue it before the father of the bride's speech. The DJ hesitated. Did the couple approve it? Absolutely. I lied. He nodded and added it to the queue. 10 minutes later, the music cut, the lights dimmed, and the screen behind the dance floor flickered to life. At first, it was what everyone expected. A soft piano track, baby photos of Madison, family portraits, a cheesy graduation picture where Rick beamed like a proud dad.
But then the audio changed.
Rick's voice. "We'll need to list it under my LLC for now. The paperwork's just a formality." Silence. Then the video zoomed in. a timestamp, a slow-motion shot of Rick opening Grandpa's cabinets, gesturing toward them like inventory, pausing, smiling, lying. The footage spoke for itself.
People gasped.
Murmurs rippled through the room. Madison froze mid-sip. My mom went sheet white. The video ended with one simple line. Some things shouldn't be swept under the rug, even at a wedding. Then the screen went black. Rick stood slowly, tried to speak. That's not that video is, but it was too late. The DJ cut the mic. The damage was done. What followed was chaos. The bride stormed out. The groom's family demanded explanations. Guests started filming. One of Madison's bridesmaids actually threw her bouquet at Rick. My mom, flustered, chased after her daughter, stilettos clacking like a metronome of panic. And me? I walked out with Jess.
Calm.
Quiet. Satisfied. The fallout was immediate. Within 24 hours, the clip had been uploaded to a wedding gossip subreddit and was trending under #WineryWeddingDrama. Someone recognized Rick. Someone else tagged his company. By the end of the week, he'd been let go due to ongoing internal matters. Sponsors pulled out. Madison deactivated her Instagram. I got a call from my mom 2 days later. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. I hope you're happy. I was. Not because I destroyed anything, but because I finally revealed it. You see, revenge isn't about rage. It's about truth. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is shine a light. A month after the wedding, the world moved on, but they didn't. Rick's name had become a local punchline. The podcast that exposed him saw a surge in listens, and follow-up episodes were made exploring the wedding sabotage heard around the Tri-County. Reddit sleuths found more connections. How Rick tried to leverage Grandpa's address for small business loans. How he exaggerated military service on a community grant form. Even how he used fake references to land one of his jobs. The man had built his life on a patchwork of lies. And I had simply pulled the thread. He moved out of state not long after. Some whispered Florida. Others said Arizona. Either way, he disappeared without ceremony. No farewell party. No redemption arc. Just a man who spent decades trying to control every room he walked into, now ducking behind curtains. As for Madison, the wedding was annulled within 2 weeks. Turns out Grant's family hadn't taken kindly to being publicly humiliated, especially after discovering the full scope of Rick's legal baggage. Apparently, Grant's father had a reputation to protect. The marriage was over before the thank you cards were even printed. My mom called once more after that. No voicemail, just a missed call at 2:13 a.m. I didn't call back because the truth is I didn't hate her. Not even after everything. But I didn't trust her either. And love without trust, that's just nostalgia with a leash. I saw her once more, actually. 6 months later, at Grandpa's 80th birthday. She showed up late, brought a store-bought cake, and a quiet apology wrapped in small talk. I shook her hand, said thank you, didn't invite her to stay. That was the last time I saw her. She didn't fight it because by then she knew I was no longer the kid begging for scraps at the table. I was the table now. I had built my own, with people who cared, with work that fulfilled me, with a life that finally belonged to me. Grandpa, by the way, is doing great. We co-signed a deal last year to turn his property into a local arts retreat for underprivileged youth. The same kind of kids who never got a seat at the table either. He still calls me partner in crime. Still tries to sneak me cash when I pay for dinner. I let him do it sometimes just to see him smile. I graduated with honors, started my own small production company, and landed a deal with a media studio to adapt my story into a feature script. It's not going to be a revenge thriller. It's going to be about family, about identity, about the quiet strength it takes to walk away and still keep your soul intact. And I'll say this just once for the record. If they had just given me a seat, if they had just passed the bread basket, I would have shared it. But they didn't. And I'm done waiting. So, I built my own table. And now I eat in peace.